Hi, everyone. This is Alp Shah here with SAEM Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Robert Neumar. He's giving the keynote this year at SAEM 24. We're very excited to have some time with him to kind of go over his agenda and talk about some key points, takeaways from the keynote. So a little bit about our wonderful guest today. Dr. Neumar is the professor and chair of emergency medicine at University of Michigan. He has over 3 decades of research experience, primarily focusing on cardiac arrest resuscitation, TBI. He has been a mentor to a multitude of medical students, doctoral candidates, postdoctoral fellows, NIH Award recipients. The list goes on and on and on. He's been named the inaugural co-chair of ACEP SAM Task Force on Emergency Care Research back in 2007. That's been pivotal in establishing the NIH Office of Emergency Care Research and developing a K-12 program dedicated to emergency care research. Since then, he's previously led multiple national research committees. He's currently co-chairing the research work group of the American Association of Academic Chairs in Emergency Medicine. His contributions to the field have been recognized through numerous awards, including 2007 ACEP Award for Outstanding Contribution in Research, the 2020 SAM John Marks Leadership Award, and the prestigious election to the National Academy of Medicine in 2015. So thank you so much for taking time out of your very, very busy schedule to join us on this podcast, Dr. Neumar.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
I wanted to kind of get right into it with you giving the keynote talk this year at SAEM 24. Your career has been focused in research to a large portion of it. And I wanted to kind of take a look and see, with your incredibly successful career in EM research, what do you think it has been that's been most instrumental in your success? And what are the biggest mistakes or roadblocks that you've experienced along the way as well?
Well, those are some good questions. I think we are a very young specialty in the field of medicine, and research has. When I started in my career, research was just beginning within the specialty of emergency medicine. So one of the things that was really important to me was to get the training I needed to be able to be successful, to be able to answer the questions that I wanted to answer. So investing early on, investing in the research training that was necessary to be successful, to be competitive for research grants was really, really critical. So that was a facilitator, not necessarily a barrier. I think the barrier early on was that there weren't a large, critical mass of investigators within the specialty. And, keys to succeeding in that regard was collaborating with scientists across specialties in order to sort of get the background and the training and the collaboration needed to be successful.
Absolutely. I like the idea of collaboration as well. I mean, I think a lot of times people think that, in emergency medicine, we're in a silo and we have to kind of only collaborate with other EM providers or clinician scientists. But that clearly has not been the case in your career. And even now going forward, you're continually collaborating with other specialties, particularly with cardiologists and the like, on some of your more advanced research. Can you talk about what that process is like as you go forward, trying to identify those key people who can bring something to your project?
Sure. I think the fundamental thing that you want to focus on is, what the question is that you're trying to answer, what the problem is you're trying to solve, and then what, resources and expertise do you need to address that and to solve that, or to do the studies that you want to do. And, emergency medicine as a specialty is, at the interface of outpatient and inpatient care. And many of the problems we want to address, or the disease processes we're focused on, or the patients we want to treat, will have that part of their disease process before they get to the emergency department. That could be in the pre-hospital setting. Some of that will be within the emergency department, and then a lot of that will be after they've left the emergency department. And really to do comprehensive work that impacts the entire course of the disease and the outcomes, having partners across multiple specialties and disciplines is really key to being successful.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think, some people are also intimidated by the fact that EM is so broad a field, and trying to identify the areas where EM can really be the leaders for research specifically. Have you found in your experience that there are areas that really stand as kind of right for EM to take the lead on? What do those areas kind of look like to you?
Yeah. So rather than saying specific areas, I think one of the ways to focus that is to say that, you know, fundamentally emergency medicine, the impact of emergency medicine is treating time sensitive medical conditions. So either an acute illness or acutely decompensated chronic illness where both the diagnosis and the treatment is time sensitive. And we're talking about time sensitive in emergency medicine is we're talking about minutes and hours. So, that to me is sort of a fundamental component of what we do in emergency medicine. And that can go across multiple different disease processes, multiple age groups, but we're the ones in in the department, face to face with the patients, seeing them when they arrive with those conditions. And so we can be a key part of that answer or that solution, again, often in partnership with other specialties that have a broader scope in managing certain different disease processes. We've made tremendous progress in cardiac arrest resuscitation, in stroke research, in trauma research. I mean, those are sort of some of the flagships of the work that we do. But we've moved into very important areas such as harm reduction in opiate use disorder, for example. Emergency medicine has had a great impact there, beyond what was the typical scope of emergency medicine decades ago.
You mentioned that early in your career you went and you pursued additional training and research. I think a lot of junior clinician scientists or aspiring clinician scientists are often intimidated by these kind of large or broader scale research projects, particularly those that are like nationally grant funded. What kinds of avenues do people have available to them beyond just traditional PhD training to gain some experience in research methodology or to set them up for success?
Yeah, so other specialties have figured this out in terms of building research training into the infrastructure of their specialty training. In most of the time, there's not enough training in medical school to be able to be a competent scientist. Obviously, people that do MD, PhD programs get that additional training, but even then, an additional postdoctoral training is kind of key. So, for people that have coming out of medical school, going into residency, there are opportunities to get mentorship with individual investigators during your residency training, carving out elective time to do focus on research projects or be in a research track. But even with that, it's typically not going to be enough to prepare you for a career where you have sustainable federal funding. So really some form of fellowship training after residency, if you haven't had that kind of training beforehand, is really a tried and true way of taking that next step. Fellowship training programs that have extramural funding are really key to that. EMF and SAM have had those. There's T32 grants that are institutional training grants, that training slots are available for people in fellowship training programs as a stepping stone to more independent funding. And then a little bit further on are the NIH and HRK award programs, where you can apply for and receive up to 5 years of funding for research and research training that allows you to dedicate 75% of your time to research training. And that really is a model that, again, other specialties and the NIH has sort of been doing for decades, and has been a tried and true pathway to research independence.
I think a lot of people also have some fears about some of these kind of government like grant assistance declining in the future years, and kind of depending on politics and whatnot. What are your kind of advice to those people, or do you think that that's going to be a large problem or not going forward?
Yeah, I think there's lots of federal dollars out there for research. I think we're in a fairly unique position in emergency medicine that we're just beginning to take advantage of that in a significant way. If you look at the growth of emergency medicine funded projects by the federal government, specifically funded by the NIH, that growth has been outpaced any other specialty. So we are actually in a growth phase for the specialty, and I think we will continue to be in that growth phase as long as we make the right investments moving forward. So even if there are small changes in overall federal funding, I think we're in a great position as a specialty to address questions that haven't been addressed and need to be addressed that are emerging as, that are specific to emergency medical care and emergency medical conditions. So I'm very optimistic about the future and our access to funding. It's interesting. People have, proposed that we need our own institute at NIH for emergency medicine in order to be successful. But if you look at where we get our money from, we are able to access the funding in just about every NIH institute. So we really have access to almost all of NIH's extramural funding portfolio, where if we had a single institute, we might get pigeonholed into just what that single institute feels is important to fund for emergency care research. So I think our ongoing success and exponential growth is in part due to the fact that we do have access to almost every NIH institute's funding mechanism.
Yeah, so I've heard the same from other investigators as well, which is it takes a little bit of expertise to kind of pick and choose and tailoring of your research project and your grant, whether you're going to apply to the National Heart Lung Blood Institute or, for example, I think as you've applied to in the past to like a DoD grant even. But you can have success in emergency medicine through multiple avenues. It just takes a little bit of experience and maybe mentorship to find out which one's the right one for us.
Yeah, and again, in the practice of emergency medicine, the practicing clinician, sees the challenges we face and the problems that we need to solve. And because we're an early specialty, we're not a saturated field of investigators. I think the opportunities are great in terms of bringing questions to the NIH or other funding agencies that haven't been answered because there haven't been emergency medicine investigators to pose the questions.
Some people do criticize a little bit of emergency medicine research, I think, in the kind of house of medicine. And some people will attribute this to kind of the feeling of that every clinician has to fulfill this tripartite mission of, research, education, clinical service. And so that sometimes leads to smaller research projects, smaller scale research. Maybe that's not as broadly applicable. And as we kind of enter into this next stage of emergency medicine research, where we're talking about, larger grant funded studies, multi-center studies, international studies, not everyone necessarily has the background to do something like that. How do you feel that us in medicine, how should we kind of determine our priority? Is it important to still have everyone engaged in a little bit of research? Is that potentially taking away from our larger scale agenda? How can we kind of bring everyone together and have the kind of the same opportunities and the same effort going to a greater good?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I would say that as a specialty, part of our core mission is to create new knowledge that will advance the care of the patients that show up in our emergency departments. Now, how you contribute to that creation of new knowledge is going to be on a very broad spectrum. So, I think the value of early in people's career being exposed to research, getting an idea of at least how to understand the advantages and the disadvantages of different study designs, how to read the literature critically is going to be really important for any practicing clinician. So some basic understanding of the research operation and its strengths and limitations, I think, is key for any clinician in any specialty. I think there's the ways you can contribute to the research mission are broad. It can be as simple as enrolling patients in your emergency or facilitating the enrollment of patients in your own emergency department, to being the PI of a NIH-funded multi-center clinical trial. It could be anywhere from being a molecular biologist in a basic science research lab to an implementation scientist or health services researcher. And I do think we need the full spectrum of small, bootstrapped projects, which often bring the best ideas and actually can feed into bigger research infrastructure where more definitive studies can be done. But if you only have the large infrastructure, then the barrier to get to that point will be challenging. We see that in our clinical trial networks it's one thing to have a big clinical trial network to do phase 3 trials, but if you don't have that pipeline of ideas from smaller single center or phase 1 or 2 trials, then the value of that is not going to reach its, they're not going to reach their full potential without that pipeline of ideas coming in. So somehow we got to figure out a way to nourish and nurture that culture of discovery across the spectrum of investigators in our specialty, whether they're just only going to do part-time research projects in their own institution with residents versus being heading these big international or national multi-center studies.
I love that. I love the way that you put that, like the culture of research productivity, right? Because everything is kind of important, and focusing on novel, new ideas down kind of more or less the bottom, not truly at the bottom, but at the lower scale level of research, focusing on novel ideas and bringing those kinds of ideas to light to let someone else come on, kind of latch onto it and take it to the next level. I think that's a huge way to kind of build up that research stream. All right, a few more questions. And I think this will be an area we can lead into. How can we develop a research mission as a specialty? Or how do we develop these priorities together as a group?
Yeah, so it's interesting. As I was sort of preparing for for this keynote address, I was been doing some research in the history of our specialty, and I found an interesting quote from Peter Rosen. Since this is the Rosen Memorial Lecture that he wrote in a sort of a monograph in 1979 entitled "The Biology of Emergency Medicine." His quote at that time was, "Emergency medicine has yet to define to anyone's satisfaction its research goals." So, that was, more than maybe about 50 years ago. It's interesting because we talk about the research goals of the specialty, and I guess what we don't want to do is fall into the trap of the specific questions we're trying to answer, right? So when when that SAM ACEP joint committee went and visited for the first time the director of the NIH, Elias Zerhouni, he basically asked us, what is the fundamental hypothesis of emergency medicine? And we sort of all looked at each other and we didn't have the answer. But then we subsequently, developed sort of this sort of straw man, what I mentioned before, where, early intervention in acute illness or acutely decompensated chronic illness can improve outcomes. But I think emergency medicine is much broader than just that. I mean, obviously, we talk about injury prevention. We talk about determinants of, social determinants of health. We talk about disparities. So I think we need to avoid being pigeonholed into a research sort of, a research strategy for specific kinds or lines of investigation, because a year from now or 10 years from now, the priorities might be very different depending on, we just went through a pandemic, right? So no one would have had, diagnosing and treating COVID as part of their research priority, a decade ago. So what we do need to do, our priority should be, is building our research infrastructure and having the people in the specialty that are able and qualified and capable of answering the most important questions of the day in the specialty, or the most important questions that we face. So where we need to be strategic and have a plan is building that pathway of investigator development for the specialty in a way that's going to be diverse and sustainable. And that's what our upcoming consensus conference is. That's going to be the day before the upcoming SAM annual meeting. And that goes all the way back to, at the undergraduate and medical student level, to try to identify research-oriented undergraduates and medical students and convince them that emergency medicine is a place where you can have the career and impact that you want to have, and draw them into the specialty rather than trying to only rely on convincing people that come into emergency medicine that they should do some research, right? Let's get the research-oriented people to come to be attracted and join the specialty and help lead us in that direction. I think in residency programs, we need to nurture those that have research interest, provide opportunities for them to be engaged in research during the residency program, and then set them up for success in the next stage of their career, whether that be a fellowship or a faculty position. And probably the valley of death for most researchers in emergency medicine is that transition from residency to faculty, right? And we, other specialties have done this very well in terms of institutional training grants and building research training into their fellowship programs or even into the residency programs. And we've done it to some degree by having research fellowships. Some of them are funded, some of them are not funded. We have, these individual research fellowship grants from the EMF and SAM that people have. If they're sort of at risk, right? If they apply for it and they don't get it, then what do? Right, as they're making their career choices, where these more structured institutional training grants like the T32 training grants that NIH provides, the money's already in place, and then you're just identifying the candidates that can fill in those slots. So building a much more robust research infrastructure to support that transition from residency and fellowship into an independent faculty member, typically it's really a 5 to 10 year commitment to say that you're going to, from the time you're in residency till you're going to get your first independent NIH grant. I mean, it can get a K award sooner, but like an R grant, you got to have like a 10-year plan. And that's 10 years of investment on yourself. It's 10 years of investment of your department in you, and 10 years of investment by the specialty.
Well said. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that that's extremely important, especially that transition from resident to like junior faculty that you mentioned, can be tough with taking on a pretty aggressive clinical load most of the time, and then trying to fulfill the other parts of academic emergency medicine, including research, can be a big task, if you're not appropriately supported. So I think that that's a huge area where we can potentially gain. And I know that I heard, even coming up through medical school, like emergency medicine is not that research focused, So I think if we can change that culture and draw in some of the people who are more research oriented through that pipeline and then support them, that could be a huge game changer for our field. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think that's all I have for you today. Do you have any closing notes for us or final remarks?
Yeah, no, I would just, encourage those that watch this and maybe, are coming to the SAM meeting to sort of, think about, the opportunity that having a research career provides. If you think about it, it gives you the opportunity to use your imagination, to be creative, to do things that no one has done before. That's your job, is to do things that no one has done before, to create new knowledge that no one has known before in order to make an impact on the world. So it's amazing that people that love to do research, it's hard to imagine you get paid to do it because it's such a rewarding pursuit. But you have to be well prepared and get the training and mentorship and resources you need to be successful in order to achieve that. So
absolutely. Well, we really appreciate your wisdom and your experience and your passion in driving this forward for emergency medicine as a whole. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yep. Thank you.